Hi, everyone. My name's Derek Covington Smith, and I'm going to be your host for Spotlight On. Spotlight On is an interview podcast where we talk to different artists working and living in Mississippi. When I moved back to Mississippi, I opened up my studio, the Little Yellow Building, and began teaching. And once the coronavirus hit and really settled in, it became quite lonely. As artists, we're always used to having a lonely studio practice and being one-on-one with ourselves. But when you take out the option of having that community, it becomes really hard. And that's where Spotlight On was born. I started reaching out to artists all over Mississippi and interviewing and learning more about their lives. I'd like to invite you to come along and join me as we talk to everyone and anyone who wants to share their art and their life with us. So I hope you tune in, I hope you subscribe, and join us for Spotlight On.
This call is now being recorded.
Hey everyone, and welcome back to Spotlight On, the weekly interview podcast where we feature artists from all over Mississippi. This week we're joined with a special artist, and I'm very lucky and happy to have her on with us. A very illustrious career that's extremely interesting that comes up from being an independent artist through the education field into really helping artists through the state move along in their careers. And then on top of that, just a phenomenal body of work of interesting fiber arts and different mixed media. Welcome, Kim Whitt. Kim, thank you for being with us.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It's a joy to speak with you today.
Your career is quite long, so I would like to start with your art and just talking about your process and the types of art that you create. Why don't you describe some of that for our listeners?
Well, thanks for that opportunity. I wish it was, like a sweet little paragraph that I could sum it all up in, but it's because it involves a lot of different layers. But I've been a weaver, a loom weaver, for probably 40 years or so. But in the past 10 to 15 years, I've picked up painting and been doing a lot of self-teaching and taking online courses and going to the universities here in Hattiesburg and taking courses and learning about oil painting because I've always loved oil painting. And then I discovered through an online course oil and cold wax medium. And cold wax medium is this really delicious butter type medium that you add to the oil paint. And it just makes it so wonderful, and it gives it movement. And so I've really, in the past 10 years, I'd say, been exploring the intersection of weaving and painting through this medium because it offers the opportunity to do a lot of layering and cutting through and so forth. So as far as technique, the oil and cold wax is kind of the direction that I go in the painting world. And then in the weaving world, which I tried to leave, to be honest, I really said, okay, I'm done with the weaving. The cotton fibers are kind of getting to me, my respiratory system. They're starting to kind of bother me with the dyes and so forth. So I said, all right, this is my last. And that was probably, about 6 or 7 or so years ago. But I couldn't leave it. It wouldn't let me. I have a beautiful 60-inch huge loom in my studio that was there and kept calling me back. And so I went back and I set up the loom a couple of times, and I remember the time I sat down in front of that loom and I just felt like, well, hello, old friend, how are you? It was great. So the technique that I have in weaving is called painted warp, interestingly enough. So there's an intersection right there just through language. And painted warp is a technique where you put the yarn on the loom, and then you actually directly apply the dye onto white yarn. So it's called painted warp, and it's something that I learned back in the 80s when I was studying weaving at Aramont School of Design up in Gatlinburg. Great school, by the way. But anyway.
Yeah, I've been wanting to go there forever and take at least a workshop during the summer.
I highly encourage you and any young artist that's looking to explore anything in the arts and crafts world to try Aramont. And there's also the Appalachian School of Crafts in Tennessee, which my son graduated their glass program in there. And then there's Penland, of course, in North Carolina. But anyway, I learned everything I know about weaving there. And so currently, my current work, to get back on topic here, is that I've really been challenging myself to find a new work that involves painting and weaving language, for lack of a better word, but also kind of the cross-pollination of the elements of both and the feel of both and kind of, what I love about both. And I think I think COVID has forced me into the studio for 8, 9 months, almost every day, which has been just paradise for me. It's just been lovely to be able to hibernate there in this beautiful creative world and just, play. And so that's what I've been doing all summer.
Yeah.
It's been wonderful. And by doing that, I've kind of entered into a place where I've been able to bring these two mediums together, weaving and painting, and kind of coming up with something new in each area, but also I'm even wanting to stretch further and try to create something even more new, more of a 1 + 1 = 2, like the next thing. It's not painting.
Yeah.
It's both. And I still really don't know what that looks like, but I'm getting there. I'm getting a little bit closer, so it's fun. I'm really challenged myself with that.
I can definitely see where the two are starting to intertwine. Your landscape weavings, they're these beautiful simplified block colors, and then you bring in the mixed media on top of that, which are found objects, copper twigs, shells, rocks. I mean, I've seen a lot of different things woven into your pieces. And then to look at your oil and cold wax pieces, they're these beautiful color-filled abstract paintings, and then you bring in these subtle details on top to bring out the landscape and make it slightly recognizable, but you can lose yourself in the layers. They're really, really beautiful. I was writing notes on a couple of pieces, and it when I was looking at the cold wax, I think in some of your earlier work, I wrote down that it reminds me a lot of the de Koonings and what they push through, and then taking that type of a color field painting and pulling out more and bringing a little more to it and making it something new. I love what you're doing with oil and cold wax. I think it's gorgeous.
Oh, thanks. It's so fun. I love it. A couple of things popped up in my head. Specifically, when I was back in college, I was studying dance. Dance has been something I've done since I was about 3 years old. So I was just taking extra courses. Well, dance became like this extra thing I did just for fun for me because I love it. And then the weaving kind of took on a more of a doing it for a living thing. I was making things that I could sell. It's kind of hard to, but it's definitely doable. And I don't mean to diminish the dance world because they're very accomplished artists in that area. But it was something that I took as recreation. Dance was but movement is something that's very important, and it just organically came out in all of my work. It's very, I don't know if you noticed that. It's very movement oriented. But the weaving was like my partner, my husband, my thing that I do every day. And then the dance was kind of like this extra side affair kind of thing. So I kind of feel like that with weaving and painting. Painting, I love painting. It's like it feeds me. I really, it's freeing. It's not nearly as labor and intensive as weaving is. Weaving is very process oriented. I mean, it's like you do this process, and then you add on and add on and add on, and it kind of accumulates over time. But painting was like, I could paint a painting in a day. I was like, holy cow, this is fun, So I love that. But now I'm kind of getting into the real nuances of the medium of coal wax and discovering, what it can do on its own. And that's really fun for me to do. And then to bring that weaving element in, it's like my brush strokes are kind of woven, and the texture is definitely there for sure. But when I found abstract art, it was like this gift from heaven, because I was like, oh, this is so me. I'm an abstract thinker. Why am I doing these? Why am I struggling trying to make paintings that look like something that is not natural for me? You know what I mean? Like, right. For instance, I was very drawn to Wolf Kahn's work early on. And Wolf Kahn is all about color fields and Mark Rothko and that type of thing.
Right.
I was intrigued by that because that's what I was painting on my warps. I was painting these big color swatches and then, weaving with them. So I recognized that immediately in their work. And I was like, oh, I know this. I know how this works. So I took color theory at the university. I took a whole semester in color theory and was like, okay, it's different in the painting world than it is in the dyeing world, but there's a lot of commonality there, So you're right on target with the color field being kind of the foundation of where both of these things are growing. So anyway, but when I found abstract and was so joyful with it, I began to look back at my weavings going, oh gosh, those are very much abstract landscapes,
Yeah.
That's exactly what I'm doing. Yeah. And interestingly enough, this is really kind of crazy because I don't know if you know Bill Baggett, but he's an icon artist of the country basically. But he did all the beautiful murals in our library here in Hattiesburg. Anyway, he was over for dinner one time, and I was showing him early, like probably 10, 15 years ago, showing him some paintings I was doing. He was so kind and sweet, He said, but he said, Kim, I don't understand why you're not approaching your paintings like you do your weavings. So for the next 7 to 8 years, I was like, what did he mean by that? I have no idea what that means. So I've really been trying to pick that apart. And I think I'm kind of getting a little bit closer to where that might be.
That's exciting. That's always exciting.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about, and we'll start diving into your history because it's so rich and so interesting, and you've accomplished a lot, and like we were briefly talking beforehand, you just kind of went with it, and it's not like you planned out your path. You went where you were led, and it's kind of, that's one of those things where I do the same thing, but it took a long time to tell myself you just got to go with what you're doing. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your background in art and how you started, and then let's go into the business side of, not necessarily business, but the work side of art.
Sure. So like I said, I started in dance, and when I went into college, I had a real strong inclination towards culture, so I went into anthropology basically, and started studying the peoples and cultures of the world. And what really kept catching me was the art and the culture and the craft of these ancient cultures, and how important art was to humanity and what purpose it served. So as a very young person, I learned how innate it is and how very much a part of being a human being art is. So that's always been a seed in my world, and kind of maybe if I were to really kind of think about it, might be what led me to where I am today. But yeah, so in anthropology, then I started taking all these dance classes, and then I met this really cute boy. His name was John Whitt, who I'm still married to almost 50 years later. We're still still hanging. But we went to several different businesses because he's like this amazing creator and maker in his own right. But the thing that makes John unique is that he was a great businessman, just kind of naturally. So he made it work for us as a family. But back in the day, we ended up at Airmont because of a hurricane. So it's kind of cool that the story almost has these milestones along the way that were brought to us by hurricanes. So the first hurricane demolished all the big greenhouses that we had out here, and we had two big 100 by 40 greenhouses. We were raising houseplants and selling them wholesale and all that. And so that was gone, and we were like, oh, wow, well, that was just a whole lot of labor. We don't want to work that hard. What else can we do, So John had the Mother Earth News, and he ordered a stained glass kit because in the Mother Earth News it said, you could make a living making stained glass. And John was like, oh, that looks like fun. So he ordered a kit. And in the meantime, John's father, who was retired and fiddling around in the wood shop, built me a loom. This is a small little wooden loom.
Wow.
And I know. I was like, what is this? He says, this is a loom. And you're going to learn how to weave. And I went, what is that? I know. It's just like, well, okay. So long story short, we ended up at Aramite, and we had a little store up there, a little shop out on the Craftsman's Loop that they still have the arts and crafts community in Gatlinburg. Yeah. John and I had a little log cabin, and we are fortunate enough to have lots of maker friends in this area. So we were handling Claudia Cartier's work and Obie Clark's work and several other artists, plus John's stained glass and my weaving. And he would run the shop, and I would take a week-long intensive at school. And then I would run the shop, and he would take a week-long intensive. And we did that for about 9 months up there. We lived in a little trailer. And we starved to death. It was really kind of, it was what it was. We were just very young, and we were just feeling our way through the whole thing. But we survived, and we ended up back here. And so that's where the stained glass and the weaving started, was because of that. And
it's amazing.
Go ahead.
It's amazing what we can adapt to when we're young. And I try to tell my kids this, like, if you're going to do anything at all, try to do it while you're young, because you can go without food, you can go without shelter, you can go without lots of things. And then, because when you get older and you start to realize that all those things are important, you won't do without it anymore. You won't risk it.
Exactly. Especially when children get involved, the risk factor kind of goes up. But yeah, you can live on peanut butter and canned spaghetti and one beer a day. So I'm just so that grew, and we came back to Mississippi. We were kind of intending to move up to Gatlinburg, but we came back here, and Melissa Golson, I think, did a story on John. And she was writing for, I forget what newspaper it was, probably Laurel Leader Call. Did a story on John, and the phone started ringing, and it's been ringing for 40-plus years since.
Wow.
It's just kind of fascinating. So it's just kind of, I think God wanted us to be here, to be honest.
Yeah.
Yeah. He provided, we just kind of fell into this thing, this beautiful 30 acres of land that we were able to purchase for almost nothing right before the market bottomed out back in the 70s. And so we moved out here, and we've made a go of it. And John's been doing stained glass churches all over Mississippi, over 300 or so. And what I did was I started a little weaving business, and I was weaving clothing and doing painted warp clothing and doing craft shows. And at my peak, I was doing like 7 or 8 craft shows a year, which that's hard work, especially if you're successful and you have to come back and start all over again. So, I even had somebody weaving with me at the time, and then children kind of entered the scene, and that all kind of came to a screeching halt. But I did kind of hooked up with interior designers during that point and that's when I started doing commission work for the wall. which before I was just doing, clothes and rugs and placemats and, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So I started doing Go ahead.
So around the mid-'90s is when you started getting involved with education in the arts. Educational system. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that and how that came about?
Yeah, that was another one of those God things, I think, because what happened was our kids ended up going to Laurel Magnet School in Laurel. And because it was a fine arts magnet school, and we were, we were trying to pick a good place to go for them. Went there, they had art and music and dance, and I knew the dance instructor there. She was fabulous, Tammy Stanford, who's now the dance director at the Mississippi School
at
of Art.
MSA, right? Yeah.
Yeah, MSA, right. Exactly. So Tammy and I studied dance at Southern together for a little bit. She's a little younger than me. But anyway, she wanted to go apply for this job. She said, Kim, you need to apply for this job. You need to come teach dance here. And I said, I'm not certified, blah, blah, blah. So anyway, the path was made very easy for me to enter in, and I did. I went in and taught dance for probably 7 years there. It was so much fun. I loved it. Creative movement for kids. It's just hilarious. But they had an art teacher. They had an art program there that was not very strong. And I kept looking over in the art room going, oh, those poor babies, And so I became certified in visual art, dance, and theater, all fine arts, K through 12. And so I went over and started teaching visual art. And that was fun. Loved it. And then in the meantime, so I did that for probably 15 years while the kids were going to school. It worked out really well. Then our school, Laurel Magnet School, became involved in the Whole Schools Initiative, which is an arts integration. It's a school reform strategy through arts integration. Does that make sense? It's called Whole Schools, and so Nora Davis became involved in it. We were one of the first schools. I became the project director for that initiative at the school. My friend Judy Holyfield, who is the Main Street director in Laurel, who's been very instrumental in the whole hometown explosion there. She was the music director at Laurel. She left to go work as the whole school's director at the Mississippi Arts Commission. So she went up to Jackson, driving from Laurel. A couple of years later, she calls me and she says, look, I need an arts education director here, and you and I could make such a great team. So she kind of seduced me into coming to the Arts Commission when Malcolm White was the executive director, and Malcolm White was an old friend of John and mine through the college days. So Malcolm interviewed me and said, this looks like a good fit. So Malcolm hired me as the arts ed director. Judy and I drove to Jackson 3 to 4 times a week from Laurel. I went for about 9 years and did that work. The Arts Commission opened my eyes to the arts of Mississippi in a way that I am, even to this day, so grateful to have met these people in Mississippi, and so grateful that you are now there to highlight all of them, and I can say, look at these fabulous people. So, yeah.
Amazing.
So I was the arts education director at the Arts Commission and ran grants programs for individual artists. They put me in charge of visual arts and crafts since I had that experience, And I fought those battles with the education department. And we made some changes. I mean, it was slow at first, but we made some changes. But my favorite part was running the fellowship grants programs where the best artists from around the state would apply for a $5,000 fellowship. And what I did was pick the panel that adjudicated all of those grants. And I couldn't, I didn't have an opinion. My only power was choosing the panel. So I got to sit there and just watch these slides of this incredible work from all over the state.
Wow.
And it was just jaw-dropping to me. I mean, I would sit there during the grant panels and just take notes on what the panel was saying about other people's art. And I learned so much.
What an experience.
I know. It was fabulous. It was just fabulous. And I met some of my dearest friends during that period, the people that I'm now colleagues with at the Mississippi Art Colony. There was a lot of those artists, and plus all the other fabulous artists all over the state. But yeah, that was a great opportunity. It was a huge learning curve for me because I'm not politically inclined, so that didn't come real natural to me. I didn't like to go bust up into the legislature, but I did and advocated as much as I could for arts in Mississippi and education, and also for in the community. I don't know if you're familiar with the creative economy, but that whole initiative that the Arts Commission started, the creative economy, was started during that period. So it was wonderful. It was fun. It was hard, but I really did like that work.
It was meaningful.
Very meaningful.
Also meaningful.
Yeah.
Your career, your entire career, not just your art, and not just what you're experimenting with and what you're putting out into the world, but everything you've done in your career feels like it's had rich purpose.
Yeah, I think it's important to me. Yeah.
So tell me about your work with the Mississippi Arts Commission.
Well, the
Mississippi Artist Colony. What's the next?
Yeah. So I retired from the Arts Commission with the intention of coming back and being an artist again, like coming full circle, and just having time to do my thing, which I was really excited about, and I still am. And so one of the first things that I did was went to the Mississippi Art Colony because I knew those people now, and I had worked with them and helped some of those artists get on the Arts Commission's artist roster and the teaching artist roster. I did a lot of work in those areas too. So I had been working with some of those artists, and I went for a session and went for probably 3 or 4 sessions. And then the director at that time, Byron Myrick, a good friend, lives out here in Moselle, not very far from me, is a potter. He was the director at the time. Came to me and said, look, I've been doing this for, I don't know how long, but about 14, 15 years or so. He'd been there for a long time. So I've been doing this for a long time, and we need a new director. And I think you would be great. And at first I was very honored, of course. My gosh, the directors of the Art Colony, that Art Colony's been in existence for 75 years almost, And so It's huge shoes to follow. I mean, we're talking Bess Dawson and Jamie Tate and Lyle Moorhead. I mean, I can go on and on. But anyway, I was very honored, but I think the clenching thought that went through my heart was that, oh my gosh, I have so much experience that I could bring to this group and help them. Besides, I could come for free. Little selfish motivation in there, but hey, So I was like, yes, I think that would work. Of course, it's kind of interesting. It was when I talked to John about it, he had been kind of putting his arm around my shoulder going, now, Kim, it's time to step away from the computer. It's time, because I had a really hard time leaving that world when I left the Arts Commission. You know what I mean? Because you're so embedded in it. It took me at least 3 years to really get away from it.
Wow.
So he was like, are you sure you want to do this? Because it's kind of like, but it works. It definitely works because it's not anything like working at the Arts Commission by any means, but it's just managing and helping these artists bring in top dollar artists from around the country to do a week-long retreat with about 40 artists. And it's not like a workshop. It's like these artists don't come in and teach a workshop. They come in and do, they meet individually with each one of the artists at the Colony, and they say, where are you and where do you want to go? And then these artists are able to guide us through critique and through conversation about our art. So it's one-on-one with a very well-known artist.
I just got chills.
Right?
That's insane value. Just as on a human level, as on a spiritual artist level. That's insane value.
Oh, yes, sir. You have no idea until you go and have a Colony experience. And you're transformed. Besides, it kind of reminded me of being back at Aramont because you're completely immersed. Somebody's cooking for you. There's no phone. There's no laundry. There's no of the other distractions that you have that keep you from your work. It's 24 hours on if you want to be on for 24 hours. And you're just painting and sleeping, you know. And it's a beautiful...
That would be transformative.
Oh,
I would imagine you'd walk in and walk out just completely changed.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And it's different every single time. And it's held at the Henry Jacobs camp in Utica. It's a camp that's been there for, I don't know their history, but a longer, probably 70-something years. It's been there for a really long time. And it's a Jewish camp, summer camp for kids, and then they rent out that space for venues. It's a big lake and a lot of cabins, so it's perfect for us. But the interesting part there is that during the whole schools days when I was at the Arts Commission, we would have whole schools retreats there. So here I am again at Henry Jacobs Camp. You know what I mean? 15
you
years
have
later,
repeating themes in your life.
I do, and it all comes down to one sentence: the transformative power of the arts. I cannot tell you how many times I've said that phrase in so many different respects.
It's true.
But it's
so
very,
true.
very true. It's very, very true. Anyway,
well, you're working on something currently that I think is very important, and you know, you've got this massive passion for pushing forward people in the arts. But you're part of this women's art collective in Mississippi. Tell us about that, because that's something that's new and building, right?
It is. Well, I don't know if it's building. I don't want to mislead people, but the Women's Art Collective is a group of about 12 women here in the Hattiesburg area that originally got together, a handful of them, probably about 6 of them, got together and just to kind of meet and say, look, I'm working on this. What do you think? You know, just kind of a meeting and talking about our art and inspiring each other and, you know, just having a community of artists that we could talk with and meet with. And it has grown in that the artists in the collective now are, well, they always were, but are producing and professional artists. And we work towards having a show. We have different shows. We just had one at JCJC. A couple of things have fallen through, of course, because of the COVID. But one of the things that has happened because of my work with the Art Colony is that it hooked us up with a similar group on the coast called the South Mississippi Art League. And that's a group of coastal artists that got together for pretty much the same reason. So when Paulette Dove, who kind of directs that group, and I met at Colony, we learned that we had these groups, and we said, you know what, we should have a women's show, a powerful women's show. And we did at the Hattiesburg Arts Council here in Hattiesburg. Fabulous show. Oh, my gosh, it was wonderful. And we've done that several more times. We try to do that at least once a year to get together and have a group show between the two of us. And they're wonderful. So, yeah, great work. We're hoping to have a show there at the George Orr Museum of Art after the first of the year, I think is what they're trying to do. We don't have a date yet because it's changed 100 times, but, yeah.
And for anyone that's listening now, that she's talking about 2021.
Right.
We're recording this in December, and it will most likely be airing somewhere in between January and March.
I mean, nothing's confirmed these days. Not now. At this time, for sure.
Yeah. Well, I can't, as someone who likes finding those groups to be a part of and how much it means to me when I can find one that's inclusive to my needs, I can't imagine how important and how gratifying, no, that's a bad word for it, just how awesome an opportunity this is for underrepresented women in the Mississippi communities. We have tons and tons of artists. I mean, you can see if you go into social media, we're out there, but they don't always know what to be a part of or how to live as an artist. Is one thing that I'm running into, is that with a lot of younger ones, they don't. They don't understand that they can have a career and be an artist at the same time. And what you're doing is not only providing opportunity to show and to be seen, but also a chance to connect and be mentored by people in your same condition and people in your that look like you and sound like you and go through your life experiences. That's so important right now.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And the Art Colony has a scholarship program. I encourage people to go to that website. That's msartcolony.net, and kind of peruse through that beautiful website that we got, see some of the work that our members do, but specifically search out where they talk about the scholarship. It's really, you just apply for it, and we get a lot of students and college students that do that, and they come and they meet these artists that have been doing it for 50 years, and they're like, oh, okay. So they're able to see themselves in the future, and they're able to talk to these artists. So that in itself is a wonderful opportunity.
Well, Kim, for any future artists coming up, what would be some advice that you would have for them?
Mm-hmm. Well, being an artist, you're in isolation, and here we've been in isolation for almost a year now with this pandemic. I think it's important to find a group, or to start a group, or to immerse yourself in a group that is doing something that you love to do, or a group of people that are in your area. So I would say to work against isolation, or to add balance by having some sort of an interactive opportunity, so that you're not so much just hearing praises and critiques of your work, but you're hearing what other people are saying about other people's art. And it may be something that resonates with you. You know what I mean? It's kind of like
exactly.
me sitting in front of all those slides at the fellowship grant. I think that's very important, is to go to museums, go look at art, go listen about art, read about art, especially in your areas that you love, and see what's happening. And that's a lot easier now with social media, especially Instagram. I love Instagram. I'm learning so much more now that my daughter is she's here with us. Her global plans have changed significantly. So I have a young person who's very dynamic and passionate about her work. And so now we're intersected. So apparently it's another God thing that's happening.
Yeah.
That my daughter is here, and she's building an artist and yoga retreat here on our land where our studios are, so that artists can come in and mentor one another, writers or musicians or painters or dancers or yoga enthusiasts, or anything that promotes wellness to the arts, that transformative power to the arts. We're going to have a place for that here. eventually. We're working towards that. The Lodge at Sweetwater, that's on Instagram right now, too. So I think that would be my advice, is to stay connected, and be inspired. Go to what inspires you and just work. Just do it. It'll work. It'll happen. It'll come together. It did in my life.
Yeah, exactly. And go with it. Just go with it.
Yeah. Yep. Absolutely.
Kim, I want to thank you so much for being with us today. For anyone that wants to find Kim, you can find her on Instagram at Kim C. Whitt, and the Whitt is spelled W-H-I-T-T. So it's KIMCWHITT, and then also KimWhittArt.com. You can also find Lodge at Sweetwater.com and find Lodge at Sweetwater on Instagram as well. Thank you again, Kim, for being with us, and for everyone else, we will talk to you again next week.
Thanks so much. It was great.